Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Brad. What's the word today, buddy?
Man, today is a day. I am fired up. Had some interesting interactions at work, which was fun. Had some interesting conversations with you earlier today. Had, pretty fired up conversation after jiu-jitsu. I've had a lot of fired up conversations, so I'm worked up, man. I'm good to go.
All wired. Nice.
Wired. How you doing?
Yeah, it's been a good day. It's got a couple of things going on, both work and personal, that are promising here. And I'm in a good mood, man.
Yeah.
To not get into too many of those things on a detail level, but it came, the idea of a topic for a show came up, and the idea was building your bench. So when I say building your bench, what does that mean to you?
You think of bench, and you think of sports, right? Your first inclination is to go to sports, to baseball, for example, to hockey, to basketball, hell, to the NFL. Every single one of those sports has a bench, right? Like something happens, somebody needs to get subbed out, somebody gets injured, you got to bring somebody in. So what we as human beings, as men, need to have a bench, need to have something at our disposal, ready to rock and roll when the call comes. Yep. I think about anybody on a bench, right? As anybody who's ever played sports in any capacity knows, bench warmers, they need to stay ready. They need to be ready to rock and roll. So I don't know. You've obviously got a direction you want to go with this. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, I wanted to see where your mind was at when I said that term, but that's exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking about the fact that there's a couple different reasons to build your bench, and they're all obviously important. But the first is exactly what you talked about, right? Is if you've got one of your guys goes down, whether you're a leader at work, you're a coach on a team, you're leading a group of men, whatever it is, if one of your guys goes down, you need to replace that skill set. So I look at it from, I'm going to use some work examples right now, but I've got a team. I try to cross-train all of my guys so that if one guy with one skill set is sick for the day, I've got that skill set backed up. I've got a bench player who can come in and kind of fill that void. Likewise, you can also build your bench from a recruitment perspective. So I may not be particularly hiring someone, but I like to always keep in touch with people who are potential employees, because you never know when that opening is going to come up and I need to pounce on it. Because I work in an industry where if I lose somebody, if I have turnover and somebody decides to leave, my output, which is directly related to the sales of the company, is immediately diminished because I just physically don't have that person on the line. So I need to keep in touch with a couple of key people and see where they're at and figure out if they're willing to change jobs, that kind of thing, so that they can come on immediately. And then the other way that I'm also looking at filling out my bench is from a vertical level. So I obviously have career aspirations. So I'm looking at it from a perspective of, how do I get myself to the point where I can be promoted? Well, I have to backfill everything below me. So who behind me or below me or who works for me can do the work that I do? And if they can't, I need to be training them to be doing that work. So I'm consciously working on that as well. So when you say build your bench, I'm looking at it from a few different aspects, but they all tie into the fact that wherever you're leading in life, you need to have backup plans.
This kind of draws me back to some of the conversation we had with Steve Baumgartner a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. From a career perspective, I believe I've talked about this on a previous episode at some point. I know I've talked about this with you, but when we were in Maine in 2021, we were touring the Origin facility. There's one thing that I'd heard 20 times in my life, but when it was said that day, it's stuck with me ever since. And it was make yourself replaceable. Right? Yeah. If you can't make yourself replaceable, you can't progress and advance. And by making yourself replaceable, you are building your bench in a sense. Like one of the first things I learned when I transitioned into my management role, my boss, my senior director, sat me down. He's like, Brad, the only way you're going to be successful as a manager is if you learn how to delegate and learn how to teach the people on your team, the people that report to you, how to do the tasks that you're doing. So that if you're out of the office, if you get promoted, if you leave, somebody else can step in. You're moving from being an individual contributor to a people manager. So as a result, a lot of those tasks that an individual contributor does need to be shucked away. They need to be given to somebody else. And I always took that and looked at that as an opportunity to skill up my team. Like that's something we should always constantly be doing, is looking at the people around us. This is very easy to say in a professional setting or in a men's group setting, but it applies in so many areas of our lives that we should be leveling up the folks around us so that we in turn can grow and progress and move up and advance while also giving them opportunities to learn, grow, and advance. We're not only helping ourselves, we're also helping them.
Yeah, it's that whole concept of a rising tide pulls all ships kind of thing, where if you're mentoring and pulling the guys along behind you, then you're able to rise yourself. So you could look at it like it's a selfish thing, but it's really not, in my opinion, because you first have to buoy those guys up first before you can rise. And I look at it, it's very easy to talk about this topic in terms of career. So I look at it from my career in the past, and for years and years, I worked for the same manager. And we collectively progressed through multiple roles because he would get into a role, I would learn what he did and be able to do it. And at the same time, unbeknownst to me, he was doing the same thing with his boss. And it was just this ladder effect where we just kind of kept going up. I would backfill him. He would get a promotion. I would backfill him. He would get a promotion. I would backfill him. And we were just moving up the ladder. But it's that effect serves so many purposes in terms of personal growth and in terms of leadership. If you are able to grow people and improve their capabilities, that is one of the strongest parts of leadership, in my opinion. Because you can sit there and get somebody to do something. I can sit there all day long and get my guys to build the product that we build. But if I can't teach them how to improve themselves and better themselves, then I'm not really a leader. I'm just managing the work. And there's a big difference between management and leadership, in my opinion.
Man, no, that's really, really well put. That does lead to a question, though, that I think many guys will have, and I've had at various points in the past, and I really want to see your thoughts on this. What if you look at your bench? What if you look at the guys that report to you, look at the guys underneath you, look at the guys that you surround yourself with, and there isn't, they're not, that bench material is not great. Right? Like you're looking at the scrub who you'd be a little hesitant to put in that position, or you might not have anybody to put in that position. What do you do? How do you handle that?
So I'm actually going through that right now. I have, I run a production floor. I think I've mentioned this before. And for the most part, the guys that work for me are assembly workers and quality control inspectors. Great guys, really good at what they do. None of them are really going to be in the corporate leadership type roles in the future. It's just not. It's not something that most of them want, and B, it's not what their skill set is. So what I've done is I've started to look outside. I've been working with other people in other departments. I've been talking to some of the engineers. I even pulled one of the young guys who works in the warehouse and is actually just finished putting himself through college. I pulled him in as somebody under me. He's helping with like scheduling and stuff like that. And I'm slowly starting to teach him more and more of what I do, with the goal of him being able to replace me as I take on more and more senior or higher level tasks. And he can eventually be running the floor, start to finish. But the idea there is, if it's not in your current bench, then you've got to bring it in somehow, whether that means hiring somebody, whether that means finding somebody on the outside, having tryouts, whatever it is. You got to bring somebody in and develop them.
Yeah. I love that you went in that direction. You've got to be able to take different angles, think outside the box, do things differently. Right? Like it's really easy to, we're going through a very similar scenario at work. So I manage a pretty small team, but we do a lot of very important things at my company. We handle the bug process for validating bugs, prioritizing bugs. This is across our entire business. We cover huge clients. So my team has a pretty critical role in the business. Of the 4 people on my team, one of them is going on paternity leave for 6 weeks, and one is going on maternity leave for 4.5 months. Both of their babies are due around the same time. So that cuts my team in half. Another individual, long story short, I'm not going to get into it now, booked plane tickets before requesting a month off with me. That happens to coincide just before both of those two go out. So I allowed it to happen. It's fine. The vacation's going to happen. He's traveling internationally, but I'm making him work for at least part of his trip. But where I'm going with this is all of a sudden we've got a gap where we're going to be we're already a pretty tight team. We run a tight ship. We're going to be pretty strapped for a decently prolonged period of time. So the question became, who can we promote? So we looked down the bench at our tier ones, which is normally our recruiting pool. There were not any obvious candidates that rose to the bubble to the top. They just weren't. Between laziness, performance issues, lacking some technical acumen that we needed, there really wasn't any natural fit. But the individual on my team who's going on maternity leave, she's an absolute rock star. She did an analysis of everybody, rated pros and cons, thought outside the box, looked at different teams, and identified somebody that we would have never initially thought of, and listed all the reasons why it would work, why this person would be a good fit, demonstrated the person would be interested in a position like that, and we can put a plan into motion that was never necessarily on the table to begin with. When I would have first looked at the bench and thought, oh, these are dire straits, this is a hopeless endeavor.
Right.
We now have something simply due to thinking outside of the box and being willing to push past those preconceived notions that we all have, that here's what we have to work with, and that's all that we have to work with. Because quite frankly, that's not the case.
That's interesting. So your situation is based on the fact that you're losing 2 to 3 employees for a limited amount of time, but their plan is to come back.
Their plan is to come back, but at the same time, we're in a position where not only do we want to backfill them for that period of time, but we're also expanding the team.
Okay, so that's what I was going to get at is, what do you do with that person, right?
Yeah. Our goal is to scale up and grow. Like, our team is supposed to grow exponentially over the next 12 months, but right now that bench is bare. So getting the right person in was initially seen to be a challenge.
Yeah.
But by simply looking at it from a different angle, thinking outside the box, being creative, something was identified that we're going to execute on, which is pretty cool.
Have you ever run into a situation where you're working diligently to backfill roles and to train people and to get them ready to roll into a situation, and then the opportunities just are not presenting themselves, and the person you've been training is getting antsy for that next step? Yeah,
that's a battle. Like, you deal with that. Obviously, we're actually kind of dealing with it to an extent right now, in that so I manage a North America and APAC team. We also have a team that's over in EMEA, and we're grooming somebody to essentially be my equivalent, if you will, in EMEA. That team, at present, due to a lot of our client work from that region shifting from that region to other regions, doesn't necessarily have the bandwidth. So somebody who's been in a lot of ways groomed and prepared for a role might not have that role right in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a balance, right? That's a challenge, in that you've been working and we've been preparing you for this, what we thought was inevitable promotion that all of a sudden may not be there. So the fact of the matter is, we run the risk in business of losing that sort of talent. Somebody that we prepared for that, they see a dead end. They might think, okay, I'm out. There's no position to grow. So what we're trying to do is find a role for this individual that they could naturally find themselves in, like some sort of progression, some sort of lateral move that would obviously come with a corresponding pay bump and a new title. Something that, while it might not be the promotion that they were expecting, is a way of showing that that they are valued. They're a critical part of the bench, if you will, to keep them with the company. I mean, that's really what matters, is what can we do so that we don't lose this individual simply because what we thought was there no longer is. Coming back to this idea of thinking outside the box. How can we think outside the box? How can we do something atypical or abnormal to positively continue moving forward?
And it's a really important point that you made there, is finding a way to keep that person because of the effort that you've put in. So I look at it as kind of like a financial situation. You've made a lot of deposits and you want to get a return on your investment. You can't just let it walk away. So you've got to find a way to make that investment work for you, whether it's in the role that you intended for them or something else. And it's something that I'm struggling with right now with a couple of situations, both for myself and with other people. And it's taken a little bit of creative troubleshooting to kind of figure out how to get around those hurdles. But the worst thing that can happen is you don't invest in somebody because you're afraid of this happening. And then dilemmas occur where you've got vacancies, you've got somebody leaving, you've got whatever, and you don't have a backup plan. Yeah. So I almost look at it as I would rather make the investment and on the rare occasion lose the investment than not make it and have to struggle to find my replacements.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to dovetail a little bit. So I have a question for you. Obviously,
Sure.
we've been talking very professionally about this, right? But there are situations where you need to have a bench in your personal life. How do you think some of this applies to your personal life?
That's an interesting question. My thought immediately goes to my kids, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I look at it from perspective of, I don't know who says, I think it's Ryan Mickler over at Order Man who says it, but your job as a dad is to make yourself disposable or replaceable. Replaceable is the word he uses, right? My job in creating my bench at home is teaching my kids how to do all the stuff they need to do to be adults so that I'm replaceable and they're promotable into adulthood. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it's that concept is there. And that same value add is there where I can teach them all this stuff, and whether they move out at 18 or they move out at 24, they've got that skill set and they're ready to move into that next role. But on a personal level, I mean, I guess you could look at it from a group of friends and how they serve you and serve each other and how you depend on certain people. But it's not really like a promotion or a tiered system in that sense. Yeah. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. I just wanted to see what you thought because it's kind of an interesting dynamic, right? I was immediately drawn to this idea of like we've talked so much about building a pack or a tribe, and building a bench isn't necessarily making sure that these guys are promotable, but identifying individuals that are going to help you continue to level up in life, and you can do the same for them.
Yeah,
it's pretty critical.
Good way of putting it,
right? We hammer that home. Find men around you that will make you a better man. Like you have to do that. If you want to be successful as a man, surround yourself with like-minded men who are on that same trajectory.
Well, it's also about building skill sets within your group. You think about like a group of guys who goes camping. If there's only one guy that can cook and that guy gets hurt or sick or can't go on the trip or whatever, then that group is a shit out of luck. Yeah. I mean, it's a juvenile example, but it makes that it holds true. I think about I'll go back to high school football. I was a long snapper for when we had to punt on fourth down. I got hurt one game and couldn't long snap, like in the middle of the game. My poor team had to go for it on fourth down every series because
you didn't have a second string.
We didn't have a second string long snapper. We solved that problem the next week, but if you don't have a backup for important roles, regardless of what the group dynamic is, you're bound for failure. And that's really where building your bench works, right? So, back to my group of guys who goes camping, if you're on a backpack trip, you want at least two guys who can navigate. You want at least two guys who are skilled at first aid. You want at least two guys who can manage the food. Maybe two guys who are good with communication, whatever that is. And the same guy can be, multiple points there, but you want to avoid points of failure.
You need redundancies. And in life, we're going to fail sometimes before we realize that we need those redundancies. There was a huge incident at work 2 weeks ago that I can't disclose details of, or I might be fired. But long story short, there's a massive failure at work because redundancies were never put in place. And those redundancies were never discovered until the failure happened. And the same can be said for our lives. You go on a backpacking trip, you realize when you're out there for 36 hours, you don't know anybody who knows first aid, and somebody gets bitten by a rattlesnake, or they break their ankle or something. That's a situation that, while horrible, could be managed if somebody knows first aid. If nobody does, it could potentially be a life or death situation.
Yeah, and you think about the importance of redundancies. I've got one of the women I work with. Her husband is a conductor on the Long Island Railroad, which is a commuter rail from the city out to the island. And part of their test to be a full-fledged conductor is they have to be able to draw a map of the entire railroad from Penn Station all the way out to the island and mark every switch, every signal, every, I don't even know all the different terms, but they have to, from memory, be able to draw that map and tell you what each one of those components is, what it does, and how it operates. They'll never have to do that in real life, but it instills in them the redundancy to have that kind of map internalized in their brain so that if everything goes down, they can still operate and still maneuver and still navigate through the process to at least get the trains into a safe location. So it's that concept of redundancy. We're talking about it in people, but redundancy in general is a game plan that you should be working on.
Yeah, exactly. You think, coming back to sports, right? I mean, you think about building a bench, the whole concept is based in sports. What happens when your quarterback gets hurt, your second string quarterback gets hurt, and you don't have a third string quarterback? It's where you find yourself like the Denver Broncos in, 2021, where they were playing like their third string wide receiver at quarterback.
The Niners this year.
Or the Niners this year.
Yeah.
Like, those things happen. And building a bench requires effort. It requires recognizing when those needs are, when they're there. But at the same time, it requires a certain level of humility that when you fail, rather than throwing your hands up in the air and giving up or getting pissed off or throwing a fit, looking at that, analyzing the situation and saying, you know what? We didn't have that in place. I'm going to make sure that happens next time. I'm going to make sure that when this same event arises in the future, we are prepared. Because,
and if you're, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and if you're diligent about building that bench, you could end up with, you never know when you're going to walk into that next Tom Brady scenario where your starter, your stud goes down and your backup is actually even a better solution.
You're a Patriots guy, so you recognize this.
I could not throw the Tom Brady reference into a bench conversation, but
here's the thing people forget about, though. Like, Tom Brady's, like, the starting quarterback for the Patriots was Drew Bledsoe. He was the number 1 overall pick. He was a Pro Bowler. It's not like he sucked.
No, he was good.
He was pretty good. But to that point, when it comes to building your bench, I loved how you reference your kids. Like, I really do love that, in that you look at what you're trying to do, what you're trying to strive for as a man. It's your legacy. Your legacy is carried on through your lineage, through your kids. So at the same time, when we're talking about professional situations and personal situations and jobs and men's groups and all these things, coming back full circle to what you said earlier, this applies in every aspect of your life.
Absolutely.
Like, make your kids, teach your kids, show your kids the kind of men and women that they're supposed to be, and your legacy will carry on.
Well, I think it comes down to how closely related building a bench and succession planning are.
Yeah.
Right. So the kids thing is really, if you want to get down to nitty gritty, it's probably more succession planning than it is building a bench, but they're very much one and the same.
Yeah.
You look at a sports team, right? Eventually that starter is going to get old and worn out and you're going to need to go on to the second option. So having that bench built makes sense to have that guy just come in and replace the starter. The same thing with work. You're either going to promote people out of positions or people are going to retire and you're going to need to fill those positions. It's better to have a bench than to have to go out to the Wild West and just get somebody off the street. So succession planning and building a bench are very, very closely tied together. And when you talk about your kids, that's exactly what it is. It's a succession of your family lineage. It's a succession of your family values. And by building up their skills and making them, quote unquote, promotable to adulthood, you're ensuring the success there.
I don't know, man. I don't have anything to add. That's a pretty good way to wrap, man. I know this was a little bit of a shorter, quick and dirty episode, but
no, it was good. Yeah. And this topic was pretty cut and dry and pretty straightforward, but I think it's important to talk about because having those backups, having that bench, having that succession planning that, we got to in the end, it's really important in multiple facets of life. And I don't think enough guys are thinking about it and moreover acting on it, building out a plan, building out a plan of action in order to carry it out. I would encourage guys to take a look at the areas in their life where they lead, whether it's at home, at work, in a men's group, at church, wherever it is, and start thinking about the roles in that group, who can cover those roles, and invariably who's going to take your place when you move out of that role, whether you move up or you move out, because it's your job as the leader to be developing those people. You don't necessarily have to do the development work, but it's your job to be putting those plans in place and ensuring that development happens.
Really well put.
All right. Well, fellas, thanks for listening again. It was a fun episode. I hope you guys are checking us out at untamingmasculinity.com. You can find all our show notes there, as well as links to our social media. Our social media, especially our Instagram, has been doing pretty well lately, so let's keep that going. If you found value here, please give us a rating and review on your podcast player. That helps us spread the word to other men more than you know. The rating and the review is really what helps, the combination. And finally, make sure you're coming back next week for some more great content. Until then, we will leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?